so far when we talk about the dominant chord, we've only looked at it as a triad, and we haven't looked at it as a seventh chord. We haven't talked about voice leading of seventh chords at all. At this stage, that's okay, because we're not going to work too much with seventh chords for the first couple of weeks. But we should look at voice leading a seventh chord, and let's talk about it with the dominant seventh chord, because the dominant seventh chord is the seventh chord we're going to work with over the next 6 weeks the most. And actually, I think it's fair to say that the dominant seventh chord is the seventh chord that we see the most in classical music. It's good to follow what we were just talking about, where we were talking about leading tones, to follow a discussion of resolving the leading tone with a discussion of the voice leading of a dominant seventh chord. Why? Because the dominant seventh chord actually introduces an additional leading tone, so to speak. Let me explain. Here we have a dominant seventh chord in the key of C, root, third, fifth, and seventh. Now, this note, well, we know we can actually voice lead this down to the fifth because it's in an inner voice, but let's actually voice lead it up properly. And this one, we're going to want to, well, actually, let's talk about this first. If this is because this is the seventh, and I said that we have an added leading tone, right? So obviously, it's not any of the first three that we've already talked about. It would have to be in the seventh. This seventh is, well, we never really call it a leading tone, but it's what we call a tendency tone. Actually, both these notes are tendency tones. And what does that mean? It means that they tend to go to certain notes. As you already know, the leading tone tends to resolve to the tonic. So where does this guy go? Well, this seventh, or it's in the key, it's actually the fourth scale degree, right? So we're in the key of C, and the F is the fourth scale degree. So this fourth scale degree resolves down to the third scale degree. So let's throw that in there. Good. So we resolve this leading tone up and this tendency tone, this fourth scale degree, down. And then we want to fill in the triad. So we do that. Now, this sounds okay. Let me play it for you. But actually, it sounds, to be honest with you, it sounds a little funny. It sounds okay, but it doesn't sound great. And why is that? Well, this note generally wants to resolve to the tonic as well. This is not a tendency tone, just so that you understand. But we're going from a 5 chord to a 1 chord. Maybe this is a kind of cadence, going to be the end of the piece, and we're going to need to end with the soprano on the tonic, like that. So some of you might say, oh yeah, well, just do that, that's fine. And some of you may be a little bit more cautious, and you say, okay, that's fine that you just did that, but now we're missing a note. Look, we've got root, 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 and third. Okay, so is that acceptable? It is actually acceptable. This is completely fine. Let me play it. It sounds a little bit thin, but you will find this a lot of times, especially at cadences. Now, understand that you can't have root, 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 and fifth. That you can't have. Why is that? Because we need the quality of the chord. Let me play for you quickly. If for some reason I did this, what we hear is that last chord doesn't, we can't hear the quality of the third, and it sounds very empty. You find this kind of thing more, well, not this voice leading, but this ending on this root, fifth, and root in much earlier music. But at the time of, in the 18th century, you wouldn't find this. You'd find this. So this is okay. We also know that if we want a richer sound, we want to have all three notes. So and this is in an inner voice, so we can do this. And this is the richest sounding version. but I'll leave it like this for right now. Then I want to do another voicing of this to demonstrate something. Okay, good. Notice that we only have roots, two roots, the third and the seventh. Remember, I had mentioned if you voice this chord, the dominant seventh chord, with only 3 of the chord tones, then you want to drop the 5th, yeah? So that's what we have here. Let's have a kind of common tone approach. Here's our common tone, so we're going to keep that the same. And then these are our tendency tones, right? The leading tone and the 4th scale degree. So they resolve to the places that they're supposed to resolve. Well, we notice, let's go back to this first one. We notice that it resolves inward, right? These two voices go towards each other, and these two voices go away from each other. So this is maybe a nice little thing to remember. When the spelling of these tendency tones forms a diminished 5th, as it does here, right? Here we have the B and the F. It's diminished 5th. Then they're going to generally resolve inward, towards each other. When the spelling of them forms an augmented 4th, as they do here, remember that the diminished 5th and the augmented 4th sound exactly the same. They're what we call the tritone, yeah? Because they're exactly 3 whole tones away from each other. Okay, so when the tritone is spelled as an augmented 4th, then the voices are going to resolve away from each other. So that's kind of a nice thing to keep in mind as a way to remember how you should voice lead these notes in general.